After 7 long years of privately carrying my family's debt, everything truly ended in 10 seconds at St. Jude's Cathedral when my mother leaned in and uttered the words that made everyone turn their heads. I, Alara Hayes, aged 35, stood perfectly composed beneath the vaulted ceiling, fully aware this entire Sunday service was a calculated facade. My mother, Eleanor Hayes, had dragged me to the front pew beside the community's wealthiest donors, a performance intended only to shield the reputation of my younger brother, Jackson Hayes, from his latest financial disaster. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and hypocrisy, making me despise the setting even more. I focused on the stained glass, silently waiting for the inevitable moment of public maneuvering that my parents always relied upon. It came just as the offering plates were passed. My mother tightened her grip on my arm, leaning so close her perfume was overwhelming, and she did not whisper, "You should sit in the back row. That's where children without morals belong, and no one here wants to see someone like you." I felt the immediate sickening shift of the crowd's attention. Instead of breaking down or leaving discreetly, I calmly retrieved the certified check for $250,000. I was instructed to donate, holding it up for everyone to clearly see. I slowly ripped the paper in half, then into quarters, letting the pieces drift onto the immaculate carpet. Ignoring the collective gasp, I walked directly to the side aisle microphone, reserved for announcements ready to make my final shattering declaration. The consequence of this single public act would be the swift and brutal collapse of a carefully constructed empire. If you've ever been forced to choose between a contract and your blood, please like this video. Tell me how you felt in that situation. What's the worst thing a family member has ever done to you? Don't forget to tell me where you are and what time zone you're watching in, so I can feel your breath. The root of that public humiliation was not a sudden burst of malice. It was a deep-rotting structure of parental preference cultivated over decades. My struggle did not begin when I became a debt guarantor 7 years ago, but long before, stretching back to the earliest memories of my childhood. I was raised in a world where every single family decision, every financial opportunity, and every ounce of affection was meticulously funneled toward one person. I introduce my father, Graham Hayes, a man whose quiet pride rested solely on the performance of his son, and my mother, Eleanor Hayes, the orchestrator of the family's public image and the primary enforcer of the imbalance. From the moment my younger brother, Jackson Hayes, was old enough to walk, he was draped in the finest private school uniforms and whisked away on exclusive, expensive trips with my parents. Experiences I was always told were too frivolous for my studious nature. While Jackson was given a new sports car on his 16th birthday, I received a hand-me-down sedan, accompanied by a lecture on the virtues of frugality. This disparity was simply the baseline of our existence, an unwritten rule that permeated every interaction within the Hayes household. The unfairness only compounded itself as we entered adulthood. Upon graduating from college with middling grades, Jackson was immediately parachuted into a high-level, completely undemanding position at Hayes Property Group, the very company my father founded. Jackson was placed on an accelerated partner track, given lavish expense accounts, and allowed to stumble through mistakes without consequence. Meanwhile, I was quietly expected to disappear into the professional world and manage my own destiny without a single penny of family assistance or a job offer. I spent my 20s diligently building a career in corporate finance, a field starkly removed from the real estate empire they were grooming Jackson to inherit. I still vividly recall the day I asked my mother for a small loan to cover my first apartment security deposit, a request she met with cold amusement. She looked at me over the rim of her coffee cup, delivering the philosophy that guided their parenting. "You need to be independent, Alara. Jackson needs our help because he is our only son, and he requires guidance to meet his potential." That statement solidified the painful truth my independence was not a source of pride for them, but a convenient excuse to neglect me while simultaneously lavishing resources upon Jackson, who was deemed incapable of surviving without their constant, expensive intervention. This systemic emotional disregard shaped me into the professional I became. The constant lack of respect and affection from my parents forced me to forge a formidable resilience, an emotional armor that made me strong, but undeniably isolated. I learned quickly that the only currency respected by my family was power, not sentiment. Consequently, I intentionally chose to pursue a specialized career in complex corporate finance and accounting, deliberately avoiding the easy lure of the family's real estate business. This decision was not merely about escaping their shadow, it was about acquiring the precise technical knowledge required to manipulate the very system that governed their wealth. I was preparing for a future they could never anticipate, building a weapon they had unintentionally funded by forcing me to become self-sufficient. My distance became my greatest strategic advantage. The true turning point in my life, the moment I transitioned from a dutiful, overlooked daughter to the secret controller of the Hayes legacy, was not marked by my first job promotion. It was triggered by a desperate late-night phone call from my father. I was 23 years old, working long hours at a prestigious firm in the city, finally establishing the self-made career my parents had demanded of me. I had just purchased my first small property, a symbol of the financial independence I had fought so hard to achieve when the call came through at nearly midnight. The voice on the other end was not the confident, booming sound of Graham, the founder of Hayes Property Group. It was the terrified whisper of a man whose world was dissolving. He confessed the company was facing imminent collapse, a direct result of the 2008 market slump compounded by a series of reckless, overly optimistic investments he had sanctioned against the advice of his CFO. This was not Jackson's fault. This was the consequence of my father's own hubris, a mistake so vast it required a $3 million immediate capital injection just to prevent the banks from seizing everything the family name was built upon. He and my mother Eleanor had exhausted every liquid asset, every line of credit, only to find themselves staring into the abyss of complete bankruptcy. When I met them the next day in the hushed, sterile environment of their lawyer's office, they were frantic. My mother wept not out of fear of losing their home, but out of the sheer terror of losing their social standing. "We need $3 million, Alara." My father pleaded, his face etched with shame. "We have nowhere else to turn. If the company collapses, everything we own will be liquidated. We will lose everything." It was the first time they had ever genuinely needed me, a stark reversal of the dynamic that had defined my entire life. I felt a cold detachment as I listened to their desperate plea, realizing this moment was not a request for familial help, but a unique transactional opportunity for power. I had the specialized financial knowledge, the clean credit rating, and the liquid capital they desperately lacked. I agreed to provide the $3 million, but my aid came with stringent, non-negotiable terms that their lawyer reluctantly documented. I would not accept a simple loan repayment schedule. I demanded a complex package that secured 71% of the company's net assets as collateral, granting me complete secret financial oversight and veto power over all future major transactions. Furthermore, I stipulated that all documents would be executed under an unbreakable non-disclosure agreement, ensuring Jackson and the public would never know the true savior or the price paid for salvation. I need total financial control and the primary lien on all assets. I stated, my voice calm, contrasting sharply with their palpable desperation. "The only reason I will do this is to safeguard the one thing I earn myself, my own security. This is not about saving your legacy. This is about buying my own future." My parents, seeing their carefully constructed life dissolving before their eyes, instantly agreed, signing away their future sovereignty to the daughter they had always scorned. From that day forward, I embarked on a clandestine career journey utilizing my finance background to stabilize the Hayes Property Group from the shadows. I worked tirelessly from my small office apartment, optimizing cash flow, renegotiating debt, and implementing strict accounting practices. I never once asked for public acknowledgement, satisfied instead with the knowledge that I was the ghost in the machine, the silent owner who held the entire family's fate firmly within her grasp. I continued to live the modest life they had trained me for while simultaneously preventing the catastrophic collapse of the empire they intended for Jackson. From the moment I signed that indemnity agreement, I transformed into the unwilling, invisible guardian of their empire. The ink on the paper was barely dry, yet the shift in my financial role and consequently, the psychological dynamic of my relationship with my family was instantaneous and absolute. That 71% SR security arrangement was far more than just collateral. It was a silent, long-term, non-remunerated employment contract which bound me to the constant performance of financial damage control. I became the company's primary risk guarantor and shadow chief financial officer, managing every potential liquidity exposure while remaining officially non-existent within the corporate hierarchy. The entire agreement was deliberately buried deep within confidential legal trusts and obscure shell corporations, a secret known only to my lawyer, my father, and my mother, ensuring Jackson and the public remained completely oblivious to the truth of their foundation. For 12 agonizing years, Jackson remained the gilded figurehead, his innate corporate incompetence perpetually shielded by my exhaustive behind-the-scenes vigilance. His professional tenure at Hayes Property Group was a relentless stream of minor financial catastrophes, ranging from egregious misuse of corporate credit lines for personal gain to entering into wildly unfavorable real estate option contracts, which threatened immediate costly default. Every few months, I was forced to execute complex, discrete wire transfers from my own consolidated savings to compensate for his deficits, ensuring the company's operating accounts always appeared flawlessly stable to the external world regulatory bodies, and especially the family's high-profile banking partners. This endless financial cleanup meant I was not just their daughter. I was their high-functioning, highly specialized human insurance policy. The most painful aspect throughout this period was the incessant psychological toll inflicted by my mother, Eleanor. Each time I successfully averted one of Jackson's latest corporate disasters, she would redouble her public praise for his supposed tenacity and entrepreneurial spirit within their social circle, cementing his fraudulent reputation. Simultaneously, she would casually dismiss my actual career achievements as merely utilitarian and unimaginative, often remarking that I was indeed fortunate to possess the kind of stability only provided by the family name I was, in reality, the sole individual propping up. My entire self-worth was systematically devalued and discounted to elevate the reputation of the son who was actively dismantling the foundation. This endless commitment to maintaining company liquidity came at the steep expense of my personal ambition and financial growth. I was repeatedly forced to forego incredibly lucrative individual investment opportunities, including the chance to acquire a significant stake in a promising tech startup, and I completely abandoned my plans for an advanced executive education program at Wharton. Every single dollar of my entire net worth had to remain readily available as an immediate emergency shock absorber for the company's inevitable structural instability, preventing me from advancing my own life. I lived the carefully controlled existence of a financial Spartan, conserving every resource and denying myself substantial wealth, building potential, while my parents continued their extravagant, undeserved lifestyle, protected entirely by my silent sacrifice. My only internal solace throughout those 12 years was the chilling clinical realization that power was the sole justification for the abuse. I would silently repeat a powerful conviction to myself during their most outrageous public displays of ingratitude and neglect, finding strength in the calculated endurance. I affirmed to myself, I accept my silence. I accept the humiliation for the absolute supreme control. That total financial control over their existence became the only dividend I truly cared about, a weapon I patiently sharpened over more than a decade, waiting for the precise day I would finally cash in the full crushing price of my servitude. All the years of silent planning and quiet accumulation of power converged violently on that fateful Sunday morning. The breaking point the moment the dam finally burst was not a whisper of debt, but the deafening sound of an unavoidable scandal engineered by Jackson. 2 nights before, my secure line had rung, confirming the catastrophic news I had always expected. My younger brother, the golden boy of Hayes Property Group, had committed an unforgivable breach of trust, essentially running an internal real estate escrow scam, where he misappropriated the initial deposit funds from 3 extremely high net worth clients. This financial and ethical violation had instantly triggered a severe legal liability exposure, totaling $3.2 million, a figure that absolutely crushed the company's remaining structural stability. This was the final, unpardonable mistake, a criminal act of negligence that moved far beyond simple poor investment decisions and into the territory of actionable fraud. Concealment was entirely impossible because the high-profile clients were already demanding immediate public legal action, threatening to expose the entire operation. My mother Eleanor, with her infallible radar for social collapse, immediately recognized the impending demolition of their carefully curated family reputation. She instantly understood that if the news of Jackson's fraud broke before their grand Sunday service, their entire social infrastructure would vanish overnight. Her goal became preemptive damage control, creating a visible scapegoat to divert all incoming public scrutiny away from Jackson. And I, the long-suffering outcast, was her designated sacrifice. By humiliating me publicly, she planned to paint a picture of a stable moral family struggling only with an unstable, emotionally volatile daughter, completely hijacking the narrative. I found myself once again in St. Jude's Cathedral, surrounded by the city's highest elite, sitting quietly beside my mother, enduring the prelude to the inevitable blow. As the solemn organ music faded and the offering plate circulated, Eleanor leaned in, not with maternal warmth, but with the cold, calculated cruelty of a political operator. Her voice, although lowered, carried that sharp, commanding edge designed to pierce the oppressive silence. You should sit in the back row. That's where children without morals belong, and no one here wants to see someone like you. That statement felt like a physical hammer blow, instantly confirming the true depth of their transactional betrayal. I stood perfectly still for one prolonged moment, savoring the shock that rippled through the pews. I slowly retrieved the $250,000 certified check I was instructed to donate, meticulously tearing it into pieces, releasing myself from the final expectation of their control. Instead of leaving, I calmly activated the small encrypted tablet I had concealed in my purse, projecting its screen instantly onto the massive digital display board normally reserved for hymns and scripture. The screen minutes earlier displaying pious verses now vividly displayed a single damning image, a captured text message exchange from Jackson explicitly admitting to the fraudulent scheme, with the crushing $3.2 million liability figure prominently highlighted. A collective gasp louder than any organ chord swept across the entire congregation. I let the ripped check fragments drift onto the polished marble floor beside their prominent front pew, then took the final resolute steps toward the announcement microphone. My heart was finally beating with a fierce, cleansing calmness, purified after 12 years of suppressed rage. I looked directly into the stunned faces of my father and mother, ignoring the chaos I had unleashed. I spoke into the microphone with an absolutely unwavering voice, resonating throughout every corner of the church, a final definitive declaration of my liberation. From this exact second, I am no longer your shield, I am no longer your private bank, and most importantly, I am no longer your public scapegoat. The entire church dissolved into pandemonium, but I simply turned and walked away, having delivered the precise killing blow I had patiently planned for over a decade. The colossal oak doors of St. Jude's Cathedral slammed shut behind me with a sound that felt both final and utterly liberating, marking the irreversible conclusion of my life as their silent, subservient daughter. I did not look back at the chaos I had meticulously orchestrated, instead heading straight to my car and pulling out of the district at a measured speed, a deliberate control preventing my own internal explosion of long-suppressed emotion. My hands, steady and precise after years of relentless corporate maneuvering, immediately accessed the secured briefcase on the passenger seat, where the pre-signed legal documents waited for their execution. The first and most critical action was digitally executing the Emergency Capital Withdrawal and Debt Guarantee Cessation Order, the ultimate doomsday mechanism I had prepared with my lawyer years ago. This single command irrevocably revoked my personal binding $2 million debt guarantee that was intended to save them from Jackson's latest criminal folly, leaving that entire colossal debt completely uninsured. Within moments, three separate simultaneous encrypted notifications were transmitted to the primary partner banks holding Hayes Property Group's most critical operational lines of credit, informing them that my personal financial commitment was instantly voided due to breach of the underlying indemnity covenant. That immediate action instantly pulled the financial rug out from under the entire house of cards, stripping the company of its guaranteed collateral and exposing the massive uninsured liability. The financial consequence would be swift and brutal, forcing an emergency margin call. The banks were legally bound to execute against my father and my mother's assets within the next 24 hours. The sensation that flooded my body was not the savage satisfaction of revenge I might have expected, but the pure, exhilarating rush of long-delayed self-liberation. After 12 years of functioning as their meticulously controlled personal ATM and emotional punching bag, the heavy chains of familial obligation finally disintegrated, leaving behind a profound lightness I had never known existed. This was not about making them suffer for the past abuses. This was solely about reclaiming the future they had intentionally engineered to steal from me, the only way to surgically excise myself from the cancerous entanglement of their toxic expectations and never-ending demand for my financial compliance. I finally recognized that true freedom was the total and complete absence of their influence and financial reliance upon my existence. The liberation was intoxicating, a purity of purpose, washing away the stagnant resentment that had been my constant companion for so long. Every slight, every dismissive comment from my mother, every negligent action from Jackson had simply fueled the quiet accumulation of power necessary for this decisive moment. This was not a moment of irrational rage. This was the cold, calculated culmination of years of professional debt restructuring repurposed as personal emancipation. I understood with perfect clarity that their suffering was merely an unavoidable byproduct of my necessary escape, a collateral damage I had long since factored into the balance sheet of my freedom. I allowed myself a single deep breath of the free air, tasting the sweet, sharp essence of complete autonomy for the very first time in my adult life, before focusing on the final technical phase of the severance. I parked the car several miles away, ensuring absolute privacy, and initiated the second equally devastating phase of the operation, the digital execution. I meticulously drafted the final official email foregoing any emotional call or personal confrontation, addressing it formally to the executive board and key operational staff. The subject line was chillingly succinct immediate retrieval of proprietary intellectual property assets, signaling the second major wave of destruction. Over the past decade, I had silently developed and maintained every essential digital tool they relied upon: the proprietary client relationship management system, the sophisticated market data analytics website, and the entire database of high value client contacts. These critical assets, which made the company functional and competitive in the modern era, were all registered under shell companies controlled solely by me and were now instantly inaccessible. I hit send, triggering a synchronized, irrevocable shutdown of their public facing website, immediately freezing their CRM access and wiping the entire client database from their servers. Hayes Property Group was not just financially bankrupt, it was digitally lobotomized, rendered functionally useless overnight, without the crucial digital infrastructure. A sharp, clarifying thought cut through the remaining haze of exhaustion. I gave them artificial life, breathing financial stability and modern functionality into their archaic structure through my own blood, sweat, and resources. Now I take that artificial life away, completely ensuring their destruction is absolute, so I can finally reclaim the real life they made me sacrifice. The exchange was finally complete, the total price paid in full. The instantaneous chaos I left behind in the cathedral began to manifest as a full-scale financial and social earthquake by Sunday evening, and violently escalated into Monday morning. The first cracks appeared when my father Graham received a chillingly formal call from the senior loan officer at their primary bank. The conversation was brief, devastating, and entirely without the deference he was accustomed to receiving from the financial world. He was informed that the blanket guarantee covering the company's major credit lines had been unilaterally and immediately revoked. Consequently, the bank was exercising its right to recall collateral against all outstanding loans. The family's assets, including the Hayes Property Group headquarters and several private residential properties, were now under imminent threat of foreclosure to cover the uninsured $3.2 million liability I had so deftly exposed and detached myself from. His entire professional existence, built on the illusion of my underlying stability, began disintegrating with that one phone call. Meanwhile, my mother Eleanor was enduring an equally brutal social reckoning. Her phone buzzed incessantly throughout the night with icy, terse messages from the church board demanding an immediate, comprehensive explanation for the sacrilege I had performed and the scandalous evidence I had projected. Her carefully constructed image as the pinnacle of philanthropic morality and familial stability was shattered, replaced overnight by the reality of her being the mother of a fraudster and the wife of a man facing certain financial ruin. She understood instantly that her coveted position on the church's governing council, the very symbol of her social supremacy, was completely untenable. The final element of their immediate torment arrived shortly after 10 a.m. on Monday. Jackson, my younger brother, frantic and completely panicked, called Eleanor demanding to know why his corporate bank account showed a frozen status and why every single file on his business computer had vanished. The digital infrastructure I had built and maintained the functional nervous system of the company had been severed, leaving the entire operation in a state of digital paralysis. The sheer inability to access client data or even their website left him completely unable to respond to the mounting crisis. The family was drowning in a simultaneous tidal wave of financial, social, and technological collapse. The inevitable confrontation occurred that evening when my parents appeared at my apartment door, having bypassed my unlisted number and layers of security through sheer desperate will. The moment I opened the door, the emotional manipulation began, their faces contorted into masks of wounded victimhood. Eleanor stepped forward, ignoring my detached composure, her voice shaking with calculated hysteria. "You are our blood, our only daughter. How can you do this to your own father and me? Blood is thicker than money. You are destroying your own mother and father, taking away everything we worked for." Graham's face was pale, his hands trembling, offering the familiar portrait of the beleaguered patriarch. I let them finish their theatrical performance, waiting until the last plea for familial loyalty had faded into the sterile silence of my entry hall. My voice, when it finally came, was flat devoid of warmth and utterly conclusive. I was not speaking as their child, but as their auditor and executioner. I am sorry that you feel distressed, but the time for familial sentiment has passed. I paused, allowing the gravity of the next statement to sink in completely. You are incorrect about my position. I am not simply revoking a guarantee. Since that initial indemnity contract and through the legal mechanisms protecting my assets against your continuous debt creation, I became the sole secured creditor of Hayes Property Group. Every time I covered one of Jackson's failures, that amount was legally converted into an uncollateralized lien against the company's assets, and specifically against the family's primary residence. I picked up a large manila envelope from the console table and placed it on the floor between them, a final, unceremonious offering. Those documents outline the legal transfer. I used those accumulated liens, which exceeded the fair market value of the property, to legally complete the foreclosure process weeks ago. I now own that asset outright. I looked directly at my mother, meeting her suddenly horrified, disbelieving gaze with absolute calm. Here are the documents, Mother. The house you are living in, legally speaking, is no longer yours. The silence was the only confirmation necessary. Within 1 month, Hayes Property Group officially filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. A week later, Eleanor sent a terse, resentful email confirming she had resigned from the church board to pursue private family affairs. The empire they had built on my back had crumbled, leaving behind only the cold, hard proof of my absolute control and their devastating lack of foresight. 6 months had passed since the day the cathedral doors closed on my old life, and the view from the floor-to-ceiling window of my new high-rise apartment felt like a visual representation of the clean, decisive break I had executed. I stood looking over the sprawling, utterly unapologetic city, a vast, dynamic landscape that was a stark, invigorating contrast to the stifling, suffocatingly manicured suburbs that had once held my ambition and my identity captive. The financial and social seismic shockwaves from that pivotal Sunday had long since settled into permanent, undeniable consequences for the entire Hayes family. My parents, Eleanor and Graham, officially sold off their final liquid assets to cover the initial crushing bankruptcy filing fees, quietly abandoning their city and trading their once elite social circle for a mandatory anonymity in a distant, lesser community. The indelible whispers of their public disgrace followed them, ensuring their re-entry into any similar social stratum, where reputation dictates influence, remained completely impossible. The news regarding my younger brother Jackson was less explosively dramatic, but equally conclusive. The permanent destruction of his reputation and his complete lack of transferable skills meant the only work he could secure was part-time sales at an outlying low-prestige car dealership. This humiliating demotion was a staggering, permanent fall from the opulent real estate empire he had been meticulously groomed to inherit, forcing him to face the harsh reality of living entirely without my financial safety net for the first time in his pampered life. Then, 3 months into my meticulously reconstructed new existence, a small, personally handwritten envelope arrived, bearing a remote postmark and a signature I instantly recognized. It was a letter from my father. I opened it not with the expected rush of anger, but with a cool, clinical, and completely detached curiosity, recognizing that whatever emotional content lay inside could no longer genuinely wound me. The letter itself was remarkably short, penned in a shaky, uncharacteristic hand, and was noticeably devoid of his usual self-righteous entitlement or calculated deflection. For the first time in my memory, he was simply heartbreakingly honest. He admitted his profound weakness, acknowledging not just his financial feebleness, but the deep moral frailty that had allowed my mother Eleanor to entirely dictate the destructive dynamic of continuous favoritism. He confessed his greatest failure was not actively choosing Jackson over me, but failing to recognize the immense silent personal and financial price I was paying for his son's continuous, wasteful, and shallow existence. He finally acknowledged the decades of covered debts, the years of mandatory social camouflage I provided, and the crushing complete truth that he was too much of a coward to stand up to his wife and his preferred child. He offered no hollow apology for the past a reservation I surprisingly appreciated. Instead, he offered a somber, utterly detached acknowledgement that my public spectacular actions were the only logical recourse for my personal self-preservation, the only true way to save myself from their inevitable total ruin. Tossing the letter carelessly onto the polished concrete counter, I felt only a cool, clarifying sense of ultimate vindication. Solitude, once a genuinely terrifying and lonely prospect, had transformed into a chosen, necessary, and welcome companion. The true price of freedom was the calculated absence of a dysfunctional conventional family unit, a cost I was immensely and confidently willing to pay for the complete unburdened sovereignty over my own mind and my professional life. There were absolutely no lingering moments of regret for the magnificent public implosion I had engineered. Every single action was a perfectly calibrated, mathematically precise response to 2 decades of profound, systematic emotional and financial abuse. My life was finally and irrevocably my own, defined by my hard-won success built entirely on my terms and fiercely powered by my unwavering self-determination. I no longer felt the constant, exhausting need to look over my shoulder, perpetually fearing the next catastrophic phone call, the next manipulative plea, or the next demand for an emergency bailout. The setting sun began to catch the glass towers across the vast skyline, painting the entire sprawling expanse in shades of molten gold and deep, reflective amber. I walked slowly over to the panoramic window, placing my hands on the cool, reassuring surface of the glass, feeling the immense quiet strength radiating purely from my own core. I was indisputably more financially secure, profoundly, more emotionally stable, and fundamentally happier than I had ever been within the suffocating, oppressive gilded cage of the Hayes family name. The entire future was now unwritten, completely wide open, and entirely mine to build. I finally understood the golden lesson that had taken me 2 decades of profound pain to truly learn. A genuine family consists of people who sincerely value your inherent worth and your peace, never those who consistently exploit you as a convenient financial or emotional shield. Severing that toxic, deeply embedded relationship was ultimately not an act of calculated cruelty, but the most profound and necessary act of self-love and survival I could ever undertake. Ultimate financial freedom is never merely about accumulating vast wealth. It is the fundamental mental and emotional freedom that comes from being completely and irrevocably independent of them. Thank you for taking the time to follow and listen to this deeply personal story of pain, precise calculation, and eventual hard-won triumph. If any part of my challenging journey truly resonates with your own personal experience of family favoritism, financial manipulation, or the difficult, necessary decision to make a decisive break, please consider sharing your valuable perspective in the comments below. Your story adds an incredibly important and necessary voice to our collective healing conversation.